The class again? Give me some energy. Yes. Yes. That's it. Good. All right. You know what I use this for, right? To point to things, but also to wake my students up when they fall asleep. I go up to them and I go like, wah! I'm kidding. All right, so we're going to start by doing our models. We're going to make 3 different drawings. You're going to look up the information. You're going to research it. You're going to draw water molecules as ice when it is a solid. Okay? You're going to make a drawing of water molecules as water when it's a liquid, the second property of water. And what is the third property of water? Gas, which we call vapor, right? So the last one, you're going to make a drawing of water molecules as a gas that we call vapor. Okay? So within your tables, within your groups, start exploring, look up some pictures, get your notebooks out. I want to see the drawings. We'll spend 10, 15 minutes on this, maybe 20 depending on the time, and then we'll compare our pictures.
Susugun detail bang data remote gores, remote roches, the remote the correct gores, and Nasugi sugar remote areas, the chile ko Nibum Mando Sumioroa, Sherzuche, Langzuche, Sazirua, Tambutelaya, Sazu Imbana ko Chapagumula Yoroa, Chapalangula Yostambalaya, and a chugin duditi kandayores, the chugin duditi gumutugorda. Sugar remote is nature Chugi Didu Copacari, but Chapangula Kandayore, a Tigila Chugungu, Tangasuki, Sherzukungu, Pickups Kandayore, the ne Tamatelaya, Lanzukungu, Lampangu, Stambala Kandadoyores, the remote gores, detail blanche, remote roches, the Hakumarwa, Kandayama Hakumarwa, ne Tajagala Senate gores, Sechi and remote roches, Rukangone.
Keep in mind the polarity of water. The electrons are being pushed towards the oxygen, right? Hydrogen is positive, oxygen is negative. So the bond with the next water molecule will be according to the repelling and joining of oxygen with the other hydrogens and etc.
Remote recursion, you get a system Balaya, Matsu Chugin Didu Caps, Solon de Laya, and you could get Kurtirwa, Kurchatsamba, Mukurchatsam Casa, Mukurchatsambatan, Yanolaya, Pukurchatsamba Yorwa. This Tambalaya, Didu Tachu system Bell, Didu Mampu Yamtiungo Yorwa. Yonvi Caps. Pukur Chatsambachita, Mukur Chatsambachimton Dego or Rockron Sigurd, the Tani Sangua, or Tita Samluna Girochi.
And try to represent the movement of the atoms, right? You would expect to have a lot of movement in vapor because we can't really touch vapor, and no movement, no kinetic movement in ice because it is a solid. So keeping that in mind, go ahead and make your drawings.
Taya Shendachi Karilang was Samlutarochi system Balaya, Chugin Dudugin Guchugo Kolaya Samlutarochi, Ra, Picha Shapa and Bana, Lanzuka Kapsan, Guchu Chambo or Wasco, Lampa in Stamban Guchu Tangade or Was. Sazu in Bicapsa, Sazu in Bicapsan, Chapa Chapi Capsan, Guchu Tango Marawa, Koto Chade, take up Sir Dudula and Guchu Marawas, Tetalayan Samlutarochi.
All right, go for it.
That's wrong answer.
We'll walk around, we'll help you, we'll guide you.
Ta Yonshe, Ropa Gonagas, Ropa Chiki, yes?
Of course, they have all the pictures in there. Friends, are we finished?
Sasa.
So as I was walking around, as always, I'm very impressed with your artistic abilities. I am not an artist, and one thing that I've always admired among all of you is that you are all such great artists, and I really do enjoy that.
Tadus kurajas tambala ya chesu pe rumu pe abutu de shas. Katu imba na tela chesu karsa ta namji imba na te karsa ngaju de chia chi karsa na chesu sama rumu keba tinda chang chang dos pe abudus.
So as you could see, if we compare ice, water, and vapor, right, they look very different. Now, vapor, you have such, miscellaneous molecules just bouncing around, a lot of thermal movement, not really a lot of cohesion, which is why when you touch vapor, you can't really hold it. It's just a gas that is going to basically poof away.
Tanda dela nga su taba imba na roa. Koge karsa namba sumge gana yopi na ne hapata lamba nanga yopi ge chuge dudila taba imba na ane ko ta dudit su kasa kawa yopa kanshila yang kung gucho gungu la yoro astan gucho gungu yopa de tanda jalo dudu tanjuri doa is tambala ge chuge lamba la ya chi lapa ge thupa imba na chi ta cha mechu siguro ata kapo ote yungu res.
Now we do keep in mind that we still have the tripod. We have our oxygen and 2 hydrogens. And in water, what we see is even though they are not bonding together, they're fairly tight.
Tanda dena ne roa chugin dudu dus shapi kapsu kola ta kasugureta kampasam dem gungunda which doa. De ngiwachiro chis. Tanda tene ngasuge shares kungula yopi kapsa patsula ya tude yomada imbaina kugin dudu kansa tanyu de yores.
Now, how do we know that this is not a solid? Because again, if we have water, we can take our hand and we can submerge our hand and bypass the water. It is not a solid.
Tandeng asuge ko dindat debi kapsa chicken did to dus debi kapsa ane tad digging asu sherzugi yopi ki chukanas songo yopa kanas hakure sena chicken lang asuge lapa dus chiupa imbana lapa nanjut ko orwa gogo marwa te sherzugi ma to thazg marwas.
Now, what is really interesting, and this is where you have to really pay attention, in the ice formation, it is a solid, right? You cannot put your hand through ice. You can break it, maybe, but it is a solid.
Tanda de kasingi gwa kare sena ko thazigwa da chapa ngola yo paim baina ta lapa saja na chit kumar was ta chagada yorwa mato pe lapa saja chit kumar was.
Because of the tripod morphology, we have the oxygens being pulled towards those hydrogens. So you have the negative charge of the oxygen being pulled towards the positive charge of the hydrogens.
Tanda de kapsa karachigore sena ngasuga compasum dengi the karsa chugin duditi nane ane kola ya tangasugi digi karsa kurla taba imbaina ane solon tilaya mukurton dembaimba. Yang tila pukurton damba gora chatsam dangi orwa tins tambalaya ane yangdu tege sulon te dus kushula thengi yores.
Now, because of the partial charge, we end up with what we call a lattice, where we have a lot of empty space because of this partial charge structure and formation.
Tanda dege kurala ya kurti rwa lokurti chatsam yobala tene deta dus ta tuku yora tubala tene dete ane koge ta pasutla thembala tene dete parola ya parton tes chir dugo yores ne ko ngoti lattice sigdo ta ngachuga jatska ngola number dina chitugo yores.
If you were to compare the amount of open space of just air, where do you have more air, in ice or water? And that is a question. Ice or water? Which one has more open space?
Tanda de kas trachis trate karesana chapata chuniga parola drupa bana kangila ya ane tongcha mandu sindu parola.
Ice. So my friends, this is what makes ice so unique in our planet, or even the universe, because the way that it structures itself, it's less dense than its liquid version.
Tanda de kapse ro koge chako delatene hapata chapa ge chako chigoro ko jasa trtan chigoro delatene de ane chuti ro da chuti hapata chapa de ane ngasuge da karsa de skula ge tang chichi ba bana jiktan khamge ju 다 셰르즈기나 단다 트라스코나네 양천신도 직다와 믹스지 차고요레스 다 딜라테네데테 코그 트라즈기 두세데 셰르즈기 두세레 총아요레스
And because ice is less dense than water, does it sink or float? And that's the question.
다 트라치스 라 차바게 두세데 추기 두세레 총아요 장스 차바데 추가 샤바임바나 나 띵거야 추그레스
It floats, right?
야 추그레스
My friends, this is the only molecule in the universe where the solid is less dense than the liquid.
아하 다 디가레스나 지금 그 감글라야 다 뉴보 요비기나네 뉴보 되게 사즈그 남바데 셰즈그 남발리 두세 총아요베게 뉴 지부쿠나데 추차고요레스
So ice is less dense than water, it floats. A lot of empty space in ice structures.
아하 나코르와 추기 가서 차바게 두세데 추기 두세레 총아요 장스다 셰즈그 두세레 총아요 장 차바데 추 칼라양 코르 추데트고요레스 다 요바데 소데 가레스 스탐발라야 코게 단다 자차고데 트리피 갑스 아니 코 바로라야 파통만 보용 거는 뜻대그레스
And again, as they bond in ice because of the partial charge in the tripod, right? You have the repelling and the coming together between the hydrogens and the oxygens. You have that empty space in the ice lattice.
아하 다단다 되게 차바게 자차게 코가 남바디나 트리피 갑스 네 동파시기 전부 요바게 전센테카레 시스템발라야 아니 카사 콜라야 디디라야 로컬 차잠바도와 로컬 차잠바요 스tambalaya 아니 로컬 차잠바 포당 모데 쿠랑 특가자고와 특가자발라테네 대단 콜라요 통차틸 해기요레스
What ends up happening in the ocean, any body of water where we have ice and water, you have a barrier of ice which floats, it's less dense, and it protects below. It protects the lower regions of the body of water.
다 단다로와 되게 가르치고를 시스템을 당가 속에 잔수이나 추가림바나 타코 추기 강라야 차바 차바임바나 차바데도 쓰야라 다 추가 강라양 코레 추되고요와 가양되고요와 딜라테네데티 네코게 다 추기 다마 샵스고로와다 띵삽사당 샵델라야 네 송추지기요레스
So when we think of the evolution of life, when life first emerged, it may have emerged in the oceans, right? Where the ocean was protected by layers of ice that is less dense. So you have this protective barrier protecting the body of water.
아하 다 지제 당가 속에 도스다 지 가서 세속의 패름다 야나가 속에 때 편지루파간라 야타바임바나 지치나 세속 동바데 네 가서 잔수기 시합라스 그러다 띵라야 좀 스바레스 띵라도 좀바임바이나 아니 잔수기 땅라야 세속 좀바지 강라야 코 쳬파 투부즈겐 스tambalaya 되게 콜라 송주지기요레스 쳬파되게
So we have established that ice is less dense than water. But let us imagine we are in a universe where it's the opposite, where ice is more dense than water.
다 단단한 속에 장한테 가르장요레스 스tambalaya 아니 셰르즈그 출리 쳬파게 두세 총아요부터 장요레스 다 게티스 가서 디 도쇼 임비기 직텐치라 요베 원당바이나
So in your groups, in your tables, make a couple of drawings of what an ocean would look like if ice was more dense than water.
다시 루카나네야 르모치 트로치스 르모데 가르트고레스 스tambalaya 게티스와 쳬바데 출리 특세 치오요 바이바이나 잔수가 넘버 간다 로치용 그레스
We'll spend a few minutes, 3-4 minutes, make your drawings, and then we'll talk about what it would look like.
아하 저쪽에 지로치스와 까마 싱아스카나 지로치스 되게 제라야 네 남바데 간다 로치요 메팅 가서 드드지고 왔어 게데 쳬바데 출리 특세 치오요 바이나 잔수가 넘버 간다 로치아 그레스다
Go ahead. I'm running out of time. I'm running out of time. I may not get through. Oh, it is? Yeah, and then we have photosynthesis. So I'm going to have to simplify this even more. Yeah, it will be okay. Will be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do this in 1 hour. I'm just going to have to really simplify it. That's okay. Ice, ice. Everything is ice. Okay. Are we done with our pictures? Good. So a friend of ours has a really good example, a really good analogy. So I will welcome him to stand up and tell us this analogy, please.
아하. 따단다 기마테 코스기로 비천던 레지 데시 야부슈 신샤스 네데 망란 데시 자로나스
당어서 데레 당어서 나지 뉴와나 카레스나 마소기다 펩시는 꼭도서 장론나 로고도 장론로 담벌렌 시와레 나로 창과차와다 디 카페지 슐로 되는 거도 다디 돼야 돼 가인세와이나 게데 추디당 단다 아이스니로 아이스티스 총아요나 디야 배우 마라 되세디야 두세 제산 디슐로 돼야 돼 가르던 거랬으나 아이스티 단다 두세 두와요 바셔라 디던 거라 게데 단다 디 가서 낙다치야나 오버셋 디 도초 예바이나 가르치그래 아이스티야 되고 마라 단다 추디 마 아이스 차디 총을 차고 오라 총으로 마차야 돼 단다 존세디로 투고도스
So essentially, because of the lattice and the empty space, when ice is formed, it's actually expanding in greater proportion than water, and it takes more space.
아하 따다데 코스데시 잡아데 시샤제로 저기바나 따단다 코스라 자츠강 올라 트라치고로 어딜레텐데 가르치고레세나 거기 다 동차대 치르고요. 디스탄발라야 추니 차베 값스 아니 거기 동차대 치르스탄발라야 거기 두세 촌도와 땅 본세 치르고요레스 본세 치르고레스.
And what I saw with your drawings, you all did a beautiful job showing that ice, if it was more dense, it would sink. It would not float.
아하 단다체수가 무페야 부트샤스 가르치샤스나 게티 아니 차바게 두세대 치어요 바이나 아니 추칼라야 양데가 마레스 추가시 알로마야 띵루고요레스.
So you could imagine if ice was more dense, you could have this scenario where you have an ocean, ice is formed, it would sink, a new layer of ice would form, it would then again sink. So you have a layer of ice upon layer of ice upon layer of ice, until you have a whole block of ice without an ocean.
아하 다케티 틴다도치 임바이나 다 틴다도치 임바나 가르치 틴다도치 임바나 가르치그레스나로와 강라야 차바치 차거로와 차바차치 게티 차바테 두세치와요 바이나 차바데 마나 툼두고로와 마 띵라야 만도 아니 티게질라야 양셰 차바치차야 테마 띵거로와 네스탄발라야 아니 타마테 가르차그레스나 잠수 삼마 차방원 저그레스.
So you could imagine a planet with a block of ice, without water, life would most likely not evolve and not be, really able to survive.
아하 따로 게티 틴다도 근직된 지임바이나 아스로아다 차마 베데 잔수 삼마 차바게 ngula yorpe jikten tena do chimbana tinalaya halamta cheshon jonat kamare chesho yopaimana chunya chit kamares.
So if anything, we have to thank water, its tripod morphology, its partial charge with hydrogens and oxygen, and the fact that it forms that lattice, that we have oceans with a protective barrier of ice, which is less dense, where life can and does evolve.
다다다 단다가 수고 추콜라에 삼루땅그 땅비 값을 두 삼루땅을 제스 추긴 되되고 강바슴 그 뭐요 바다 아니 콜라이 차점 그 쿠리요 바로와 어디 요바 되네 그 셔즈그니 카사 셔즈그니 아니 그 데라야 터즈글라 인저비 값을 콜라야 자츠강 오라 트데탄 그 자치기요 바로와 그 두세 총도 바다 본세 치르고 요바 딜라테네 데데 아니 그 딜라테네 데데 아니 그 잔수인 바나 잔수가 철로라야 송초고 무지라야 송초 지야가름 바치고 오라 지르데데 내가 소다 치쇼 총야 스고로 왔다 당보 치쇼 총하게 너무 튼친 제요 바딜라야 네 삼로 당고레스.
Are we good?
Yes, sir.
Any questions? No questions? Good. So normally we would have taken a break. We took our break. We're going to start session 2. Like I tell my students at Emory, you have a question? Yes, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Nge chwa di tanda chita ngamzu ki tanda zamling ki surface area jo ka di land ki ani chu ki tikawa chi de gyaja tuju tunjik de ro wa tanda khyapa ya mangbo yo ne kesi ki khyapa di jugo cha yo ne mathim ro wa ani chu di timsa ki khare ro saja di ya chu di ya lule tu ka srani zamling ki surface area ki sa ki gyakhyun de nyung ro res
So my question is, at the moment, pretty much 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water.
Correct.
So in our opposite scenario, if ice is denser than water, then will just sink. And in that case, will the surface of the ice or the water will increase and the area of the land area will decrease?
Absolutely, it will increase because ice expands. We have basically a world, a planet that is just ice. There is no or very little liquid. Mostly it's going to be solid. Now, ice is less dense, it expands, so we would most likely have a vast amount of physical non-aquatic space within our planet, and it will most likely expand. I would agree with that, yes.
다른 지그레스 게테가 주다 그 추대 잡아졌 담발라야 제치치로 걸어 봉세치로 걸어 네 담발라 지치치치로 발라테네데 다 단단가 속에 저게 바나가 속에 다 aquatic system balaya chutang den bigi ta schoolers ne desja gorwa te keti tanda netante gane ani chapati jar ola thamchi ti bache bai bai na ta ga sula chutang chugi gola se te yanga yongmares ta manchi shindo ta tin zamlang kanza ta karsa chapa ga yogde bing wolan jongres.
And the reason why we have a planet with water is because whenever we do have ice, that ice floats and it protects what's below it. And it keeps everything liquid.
That under the thing as well, I need to get Jinsentica system, Balaya, Chugi, Ko, Tumbuchi Chapa Chagoyore, Chapa Chabati, Chugala, Young Data, Chukala, Young Balatenate, Chugo, Ola Yopa to Sonchigores.
Does that answer your question?
Then says.
Excellent.
One more question here.
One more question. Yes.
Nadi Chu Nalola. Kyawa chazano ko nedan jamba ji sheza ta din du gala gat namgyu ngado chu di kyawa chuna ji du gon do di ju do atine yara indi ke nedan jung si waros ta di mai yang ke shamba mangbo yara pena chu gi gazo wala don pressure shukchu mora adi gi yang kyawa tendo wala media ke chesigiros
So he is saying like the scenario that his caution and you answered also other things can possible. Because when we put put ice in the water, it melts.
Right.
So in other conditions may also happen as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on the temperature of the planet, proximity to the sun, but within our planet today, with the same proximity that we have to the sun, it would cool to such degree that if ice sank, we would end up with a solid block of ice for our planet, with very little, maybe some, but with very little water.
Tanda de ko nita mabuchila ralegres ko skola gang trotse kare bata nimata jantha kare bala sopatires te keti tanda ge ji jantha ta trotse ti shisha de te ani keti chaba te chuli tu se choyo pai bai na ta kuma durwa man dobal tene de te ane ta neta kare chagre system bala sama chapa ge yoga ge neta te chagres.
And we do see planets unlike ours, for example Pluto, which is no longer a planet, but it is just a block of ice. There is no liquid in Pluto that we know of.
The picture shabaina, Tangomanga Suga Zakar Guguna Sega Pluto Yorwa, Kare Suji Shinje, Namji Suja Shinjera, the Shinje, Pluto's no position jingle. The Koimbaina, the Tandichala black ice sector, the Kochabana Pusana Kare, ticket to Nematopet and a share 60 Yomaris.
Even though water is still water and ice is still ice, with the right properties, without the temperatures that are correct for water, we would not have water.
Ta ko karsana ta ko sherzku ta yana ko chuse de sherzku ta yana sazku de gro imba na ko sherzku ta sazku de ma de trose la ragle gro ta ko sherzku la ngu la de pi trose ti me pa imba na ane de ko yo mares
gen dagite yonlo de sonlo nyo de tga jora koni chi kolo yonlo chito de chi ma do minda da mo de chi ma do minda kon tga jo yo shimba nyen tga chi jang de 그런 다 용론 그디 콜럼지와 기는 연주 대바식 레래도 코 신반님도 간인 들어가지 그랬어.
알아라 코 쉐어링
솔로님도 진 들어가지 잡사라. 연주 진 들어가지 온디 띵님도 간디스 들어가지 오래. 띵 콜럼도 연주 단 가르고 모두 직 사발레르도 간이랬어.
코 냠추 제대 간다시 거스 거라 달록도 되와.
말다 용론 되라. 솔로님도 들어가지 잡사라. 징님 들어가지 잡사라. 다고 손로 그디 직 논을래서서 다 연주 연 신바 진념 들어가지 고도 연 디파르 들어가지 용로도 연 신바 손로 진념도 연 들어가지도
알레다 단다데 코게 디트 픽업스 거라 자 디트 픽업스로
오 딘차바셔 값스 지레도 언디 컨디션을 오버스
So my questions regarding the lattice structure. You have the partially negative.
Yes.
Will connect with the partially positive.
Correct.
Hydrogens. So
Yes.
how that structure forms? Because when you have when you share the electrons, you have completely filled a
Right,
valence
but the
shell.
yes, but the electrons are, and Kelsey and I were just talking about this, the electrons are not shared equally, right? There is an unequal sharing. So you could imagine here, this is one oxygen and two hydrogens, right? Slightly negative in the oxygen, slightly positive within the hydrogens. Well, if it's slightly positive here, it will form a bond with a slightly negative. And this is what creates that space because of that asymmetry in water molecules. There is a repulsion against two oxygens, they will not join, but you do join a hydrogen with an oxygen. One, positive with negative.
So another way is like the bond between these two and these two are different, right?
Yes, they're very different.
Also the strength is also different.
Correct.
That another gelai tanda de ketenga su chugi dudu chi tribe kapsa ko nyamchu chi yorwa nyamchu chi yore na nyamchu chi ate ko chanyombo yo marwa ko go cholong ko shi chua chi yorwa cholong sa shi chua the yanlo sa na shi chong chong rwa this tambala ya khola tene de te ane ko ge kurs ge do kur lokur charge se do kur te cha chamba potang modin jong go yore sra kur cha chamba this 다 단다 데가 상아술라야 다 디디 치그 값은 디디 나나 솔론다 양로 니여와 다 디디 디기 나나 요치그 솔론데 양로 젠다 탄냠테 도치그 여와 티카레 시스템 발라야 다 코게 크르라테니 데텐 도chung 거레스 크르라테니 데테 크 단다게 양로 데라야 코 크르테 푸톤 당게 여라다 코 차점버 푸톤 당 거레 솔론데라 모톤 당 거와 포모티니기 파롤라테니 데타 아니 코로나야 창조 치트그 여레스 다 창조데 로가레스 로아다다게 디디 치크나라 요피긴데 추긴 디디 치크나라 요피게 솔론타 양론이기 데와 데이터 디기 양론 데이터 디기 솔론데니가 바로게 청와치 거와 든샤 로가레스 만다레스 코 시설라 만다레 우라 만다 차기요레스 지금 말해.
So in this picture, you have the oxygen, which is negative. Hydrogens can actually oxygen, hydrogen, and hydrogen, right? These are positive, and these are negative. And if you were to join another water molecule, the only way you could do it is by having here another hydrogen and hydrogen. You cannot put an oxygen with an oxygen that would be negative to a negative. They will repel each other. You can only join a negative with a positive. Does that make sense?
So what kind of bond do you call that?
Covalent bond.
Covalent.
Covalent bond. Based on electronegativity, repulsion, and unity. Covalent bond.
따단데 바이나 코 카사 촐롱데 바이나 코게 카사 차성 발로크 무탕 당기 어와 따테간라야 촐롱 제데 진짜서 두고 말했어 에 두고 말했어 따테간라야 디치고레스 카사 코 양두 그 저기요레스 따 데라야 코게 청와텔라야 냠쳐 청와서도 코밸런트 바운스 그래요레스
Okay?
nange tuachi tanda dido ta sadagi ko nedangi baji shesa ta dineji gase jume wan ta ra ta wa ina ta kyawa zu ma digi ta di tuzo dia talks lana gyogu mara rimba shin do shagara tuzo jagira ta digi tuzo di na lo la gasi ta chu wa lo ge sinje mangu jera 콘솔에 다 그로들라 애답트고 라 다 딘데 애답트 치기나 다 심제 그저라 애답테이션 간데도 차그레 콘솔기 이볼루션 기네야 넘버 마다와지 차시그레스 간데도 차그레스
So
What's the question?
it's a hypothetical question. If that case of happens, that the eyes sink down the bottom, and it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. If it happens,
Sure.
it will happen gradually. So in that sense, so the animals down there at the bottom of the ocean will adapt to the situation. So how?
I mean, you could
How
have,
may-
you could have, for example, bacteria that can thrive in ice, but I could not imagine complex life that are able to move in ice. Does that make sense? You could have very simple life like bacteria or very small things. I cannot imagine complexity evolving in a black ice.
The tanda imba na ro ko chapak na la ya the chalon che sikora da chalon che te imba na chi simbu gru imba na bacteria ta ane chi the chong chong gru ro da thasing ri tinda imba na yang ko chapak na ne suni chi tiga tinda ro yores te ma to pe gi nyonza che be gi che so the patient na thapo mangda gi tinda ro imba na ane ko chapa na ne suni chi gre se te yang chi samlu na ma shong chi ri gi dus Thank you, sir. That man do not answer. That's just a deep
Very good questions. I love your questions. I love to think about them, and that's how we learn, by asking questions, by getting to appreciate how we think about the topics. And I really love the way that you all think about it, because I learn from you. So that's really, really good. Thank you.
Trua pe ya butang sons ta chitang nga chu jaya de yang chi trua tang yang samla tang de la ten de ta ire se trua ya butang son tis tambala ya trua de la ten de ta ngarang la ya lu che mang burak dus.
All right, so
You need to come here.
maybe get closer to the. Here we go. So let's talk about photosynthesis. Now, like I tell my students at Emory, this is not an easy subject. You will see a lot of really complex equations, a lot of things that may feel overwhelming, but I'm going to really, really make it easy. We're going to simplify it, and we're going to just get the fundamentals of photosynthesis.
Da tanda ge ojur ko la dese jabe kaps tangi shepa na jere phugi thaptu kuzu la kange thek yore ta dege na la ya che chu ge nyamchi mampu thongre tene ko jijor ge ya menga tene mampu thongre swa imba yana ya tanda nga chu kari chi ge insena ta ko ge dege mangshi kari imba jisa kari imba te dese ja de te tanda ko ge na la ya jijo kana ro chin ru go yo me te ngutu chi ge yes.
So this is our basic equation. This is the basic equation of life, right? We have carbon dioxide, unequal sharing. We spoke about this. We learned about this, right? C, two O's. The O is negative. It's pulling those electrons, carbon dioxide. Water, we learned about water, right? So carbon dioxide plus water. What is this? What is energy? Where is this energy coming from?
Nuba said the garden ra yores.
The light. Excellent. Sunlight. This creates a result of glucose, a very complicated compound element, right? And oxygen. So plants, when they photosynthesize, they release oxygen. Who uses oxygen?
Solon peche tanjus yores sa.
We do. Species that are not able to photosynthesize, right? So we are at the mercy. We require oxygen, and we utilize the glucose produced by plants.
Ta de la ta ba imban de kare se na ga chu go ojur gi ko ge ta rotang gi menga tab disitires ra ta de ta ba imban phajo te la ya ga chu ge carbon solon ni den tin de tru do ko ge de tru do ta de kap se imban ko ge changwa de kare do nyamche changwa ka si imba ya ko chanyung ge nyamche changwa de do wa ane ti ge chu de chure chu ge de tru che de la ya ga chu ge ti tan da na ja ro wa ti ge le nyuba se tires ta nyuba te ko ne yong gores na nyima ne yong gor was ta ko gi digit te chong la tene de te chu salang a chu gulu ngar ji che ro wa ani ti ge je la ya agenda te ka la na cholong yong gores ta cholong pe che tan ji sres na nga sres ta nga chu ta ojur chi mithya sama ge ani cholong de pe che tan gore te nan sing gulu ngar ji te ba na nga chu pe che tan gores.
So we say in biology that photosynthesis is a reduction equation. What does that mean? The carbon dioxide, there are 6 of them, plus the water, they get reduced. So the carbon, is, if we go to the other side of the equation, those electrons are actually coming closer to the carbon. We get the hydrogens from the splitting of the water. We form the glucose with the byproduct waste of oxygen.
Tandi kasarwa karasagresena ngasuge tandage 지금 진줄 그나는 셰파다 reduction 속도와 다 reduction 나 oxidation reduction 도서치로와 다 대갑서 그래서 그래서나 코데 다 단다 파주들랑가 수수데 데로와다 단다 되게나네 담보이바나 카본 다이옥사이드 데로와 되게 나라야 그게 다 추근한 게 초론 데로와 양론테 쿠게 쇼라체 아니 데 조디 다 reduce 지세데 임바이나 가르스 고레스나 아니 그거 로드디 카본 쇼라 수 탱겨요 레스와 파조텔라야 냠체 총아르도 와 냠체 총 옥시젠 쇼라도 와 냠체 총아는 찬이모 마저 어데 옥시젠 쇼라도 와 데바이나 데 캅서 다 그게 카본 쇼라 수 탱데다 타마가 트림디 셴데데 가출라야 네 초롱고 디디디 중거레스.
So this is essentially the steps, the 3 steps for photosynthesis. We get light, we get energy, we have the requirement of water, carbon dioxide, we release oxygen, we have the waste product of oxygen, and we make sugar. The whole product of photosynthesis is that sugar molecule, glucose.
다 단다 데카성아수 오졸라야 코가 름바다고 som바인바나 름바수미오레스라 름바수미오레스 다 담포티카 레스 담발라야 니마그나네 웨라야 게름바티레스 다 니마그 웨람발라 니마나네 웨랑 니센데 출랑데다 티 디저치발라테네 데다 가수 가레라고 요레스나 옥시젠라고 요레스라 촐론데라고 요레스 아니 티기 제라야 젠다 티텐데테 가수라 가레치고레스 담발라야 뉴와티 퉁고 요레스라 뉴와티 tumbatilate 주땡아 주 오주르기 타마게 tumditi 뉴와tilate 뉴와스고다 에너지 스고도 알와 슈거 단다데 값세마나 글루코스와 글루코스 트렌디레스.
You could imagine you could split photosynthesis in 2 halves. The first half is light dependent because we have the requirement of light, and the other half light independent where we do not require light.
다 단다데 값세 야 시수게 단다가 오주르데 름바닐라 요치난 코레스 올라 템비기 지조치토 올라 마템비 지조치라 타는 코레스와 다 올라 템바티 강기티치 땅포 올라야치 올라 테네데테 아니가 수게 초롱트야치 거와 어때제테 올라 템비기 지조치 셴다텔라야 가수게 올라 마티비기 진지티 카레시스 담발라야 글루코스 트렌트레스.
I will say, don't worry about everything. It's a little bit heavy, but do note these 2 molecules, ATP, which is the unit of energy, and NADPH. These 2 are very important for the buildup of glucose, and we get these 2 as the product of the light-dependent reactions.
다 단다 데카스 델라 산로 타노치 에스다 델라야 망포치 요르다 임바이나네 망포나네치 군요포치 요르다 임바이나 데나네 가리 삼로 타노치 에스네 ATP 세스 토가 ATP 세나 뉴바기 코르게 지시로와 뉴바데로와 데 삼로치 타노치 데게질라야 NADPH 세티로와 데니샤 삼로능이 와치로치스 다 티카레스 스탐발라야 다 지기 뉴바인 스고도 지기 뉴바티 올라야 가수게 글루코스 트리알라 페초탄고 요레 pechotango yoreswa tandagi jigni ba ATP ta NADPH seti gangla nga chugi ojur gi tata ko tampochto ola tembi gi jijochto ga tigi ani the dividores kurang gi jijochmo dividores.
And all this is happening in chloroplasts. Whenever you have a plant or anything that is able to photosynthesize, right, you do have the presence of this organelle which we call a chloroplast.
다 데츠하마 고알렌 중고 요레 시스템발에 데츠하마 아니 고 단다 오주 진이게 쓰셔인 바나 데츠하마 데가 저 장제 타포노나 장제 원타가노나 중고 요레스.
Chloroplast, if you see a cross section, they have this membranous system full of membranes called the thylakoid. The thylakoid are able to absorb all those photons from the sun, harvest the energy for photosynthesis.
다다다 가수고 장제고 원탈라 타바임바나 장제 원타나나 탈라 콰이트즈레데 데카레 시스템발에 고고 무틴데나 지오레스타 데카라나 데 가서 오들램비게 드립차티 차고레스타 고게 단다데게 드립차디 가치그레스나 오고 오드티 고근 주트고요레스.
So this is where everything, the magic of photosynthesis happens within this sac of membranes called the thylakoid.
Ta tanda dege tripcha dege nalaya tanda nga su ojur ge chi ta magic sena juntin ro to yan sambu ge netan tin dawala chung yores.
For after lunch, when we come back, once you collected all your little leaves, one of the activities is going to count the stomata. These are little openings. They look like little mouths where we have the gas exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Ta shendati kare system bala nyungkong jabla ne chechu ge takshe chete res ta tin ala ya chechu ge luma khyong gorwa luma khyong ta ne luma ge na ne chechu ge tanda ge de dire do na na yo pa te min la ya longkhong chirwa longkhong de kaso me tang ka ja go yo res te kha do yo res rwa tin na ne ne ko long ge lang zu ke te panch la ya chlo ta ya ta na lo ta ya ge te chi che li ti chi go res.
And stomata are essentially guarded by these guard cells that either open or close them depending on the time of day. They remain closed during the day because of the heat. It's really hot. They cannot desiccate. At night, when it cools, they open, allowing for the gas exchange.
Ta danda de ka semba na ko ge tripchate dina do yo res ro longkhong ge derwa ya ko ge khashi tan khama she te karela rali res stambala ya ane dela rali ge yo res ta chi ku nima tan chaimu gu tu te rali ge res ta de ka semba na nima ko ba na ko kha jab de res kha jab de te ka sla na ko trche shicham bo yo wa chawa yo jong ko kha ja de ko res gonda ba na ko kha chi de te ane ka sa ta langje te shlo ta ya ta na lo ta ya ge le ka te chi res.
Okay, so here are the consequences of photosynthesis. Now again, this is a little bit heavy. I'm going to really simplify it. We're going to work in terms that we can all understand.
Tate nyokta sauchi or by manati tap kan de ngane de jagins.
So whenever you have a chloroplast in a plant getting hit by photons, sunlight, what essentially happens is that they're going to be excited and they will reach a reaction center.
The photon will reach
Yes,
it.
the photons are going to excite the chlorophyll within the chloroplasts, and they're going to bounce from island to island within the chlorophyll, and they're going to react or activate the reaction center.
Ta danda karchi re sena ro nga su ge jangje wan thak na la ya lodot tin jong go ro wa lodot tin jong de ta lodot le pa na ta ti ge je la ya lodot ko ta de ka se ba na photon te lodot ro ta ko ka se to ko lodot masta odutirwa odutita ko chong thama de la ya kar ta reaction center size to ko jinjur dua ge tiwa chi gorwa jinjur ge tiwa te ne salon chi ge yores.
And once this reaction center is at the hub of the chloroplast is activated, it's going to send those electrons and start the redox reaction, which is what we started with earlier.
Ta tange de ngola ya ko ge taksi chibi ka sa jinjur tin du ka sa reduction reaction se do wa ro te druya de se gores ta de la ya ta ka sa jinjur ge tiwa de la he pa ba na ani ko ge ka sa ani lodut de dus loka chi gores.
And like I said before, photosynthesis has two different parts, light dependent and light independent. This portion is light dependent because we are depending on photons activating the reaction center. Without light, we would not be able to activate it.
Ta tanda de tangi shepa na shenre nga su ojo la ya ramba ni che ola temba chita ola ma temba chi warwa tanda de ola temba tires te keti ola me pai bana od me pai bana de jont kumares tanda de la ya jijur go tiwati salon chit kyo mares.
The light dependent portion of photosynthesis has two stages. We'll start with photosystem 2. And we'll start with 2 for a reason that I will tell you in just a little bit.
Ta tanda de la ya ramba ni yores ro ola temba de la ya ramba ni yores ta de na ne ramba de la ya photosystem se do o teng mala tangpo ta nyo yores nga su tangpo de niba ngu chu ins ta de je la ya de niba ngu chu nu gu jinsen jilan de jagos.
So let's walk through this together. Photosystem 2, photons activate the reaction center, electrons are sent, they get sequestered by this enzyme thiophytin, and they get sent to this complex making ATP, which is the unit of energy for photosynthesis.
Ta tanda de chia kare system bala ya nga chu go odu te du syon de tan ko ge jinjir go tiwatel hes tambala te selon che wala tene de ko logdo logo yo res ro logdo lo bala tene de ta gala ya ane ko minjis to ka gangate minjis che ta minji ti gi de te ane minji ti la tene de ta na che la ya karin chungo res na ti la tene de te ro minji ti la tene de te kar chungo res na nga su ge ATP ti chungo res ATP ti nubar wa.
So what essentially happens in photosystem 2, don't worry about this detail. What ends up happening is that we get water. Water is broken down. We get the H from the water, and the water is used to make ATP.
다 단데 값을 가르치고 그래서 스탄발라야 아니 추티 고 카트해 버치고요. 그래서 추긴 뒤뒤 카트해 버치데테 맞출라 가르라고요래 디라고요와 데 양론데라고도와 양론데라데다 양론티 페체당데다 맞출라 니와 ATP 티주고요레스.
So if there is something I need you all to remember, write this down. Photosystem 2 creates ATP. Write it down.
아하. 다데 마라 트로체스와 단단가 수그 어조그나네 어그말라 니바테나 가르치고레스 스탄발라야 어그말라 니바테나라 ATP 주튼치고요레스 니바테 주튼치고레스 에티트로치스.
Okay? Following photosystem 2, now we have photosystem 1. And I'll talk about why we have the reverse numbers.
아하 다 포토 타가 어그말라 니바테 사로와다 단단가 수게 어그말라 담보됐다고스.
So again, don't worry too much about the details. I'll walk you through this. In photosystem 1, similar to photosystem 2, photons are coming in. We activate the reaction center. Electrons are sent. And now they're accepted by a different enzyme, ferrodoxin. And we make not ATP, but we make NADPH.
다 여기 말라 담보 티나나 가른 중고레 시스템발라 이거 우드티 단다 우들해 발라테네데 아니 가서 진주르게 티와티 셀론치 발라테네데 고 로도 로고 여와 로도 로 발라테네데 menzi 다 젠다 치로고 레스와 menzi 젠다 치로고 레스 menzi 젠다 팀라야 menzi 젠다 팀라 카레스나 페라독신 세도가 menzi 디로고 레스 다 로 발라테네데 ATP 주마레스 다 고즈야티 NADPH 세티 주레스.
So as you could see, both photosystem 2 and photosystem 1 are light dependent. We depend on photons activating the center and making either ATP or ADPH.
나하다 다다시스 통화 나셔레 오그 말라 땅보땅 아니빠 니샤 의라 땡겨요레스 와 그거 의들로 발라텐데다 로들로 발라텐데데 타마텔라 지네 ATP 제튼치고레 센데텔라야 NADPH 제튼치고레스.
And why did I show photosystem 2 before photosystem 1? Anybody want to guess as to why I showed 2 before 1?
아하다 다다데 그래서 오그 말라 땅보고 ngola 땅보 니와 그래서 오기 말라 땅보티 질라테 니바테 ngola 텐소아 진세 가리니 티 초바치니 요에사
Yes. 당보디는 어디 찌른데 니바디는 어디니래다 팀이로.
maybe in the photosystem 2 you have in the photosystem 2 you have 1 electron and over here you have 2 electrons.
Very good guess. Excellent guess, although that is not 100% correct. Very good guess though. My students, whenever I ask this to my class, they tell me all kinds of answers. Nobody has said that before. And that's a very good answer. Well, although it's not quite correct. But very good.
Tata cheremandu sembainaya la yapunangso namji zinda phinin zinda nana trote tristambala khutsu len kanjo majo jagre semban tandagi lenti tandobeta jamasons.
Any other guesses before I tell you?
Mashe ngola ya chopachini yoesa.
No one?
ATP. Because of production for ATP in the photosystem 2?
That's what they make, although that's not why I showed photosystem 2 before photosystem 1. And I'll tell you why.
니바 시에 qabla jachesan chikse. Ta tambo de mates ma 37 shina. Na waji mala tambo de ngole she goyade, niba de ngole she goyade, jiung ka chan chikto. Ni chamba de tesma.
So I feel like when you talk about the photosystem is a kind of general or bigger picture, and the photosystem 1 you are going into detail.
Yes, you're talking about the chronological order and you're getting to the answer. And I'll tell you what the answer is. That's quite correct. The answer, to save time, is that the way in which they were discovered by scientists. They discovered photosystem 1 first, and then they discovered photosystem 2, but the order in which they happen in a plant, photosystem 2 happens before photosystem 1. So they're in reverse because they were discovered in reverse, but they occur photosystem 2 and then photosystem 1.
Tanda de Taranjares, the Chisuga Tange Gishila Sonkas in Banako, Malaki, Takars, Ko Chongtong, Chongrim Latin de Dores, Tati Karesana, the Nipati Tampu Ngola de Sejaguate, Kares Tambalaya, Natsu Chongran Latabambana, Tomatelaya, Tangi Ugumala, Nipati Nana Chungo Patichon, Tigi Jelaya, Tampuna Chungo Patichungores, the Minti Karsi Tares Tambalaya, Ko. 다 하고야 그거다 세니치에게 구름때도 도샤요레스 다 고수게 당포텔라야 세니치와텔라야 오그말로 당포타 아니와텔라야 오그말로 아니와타샤요레스 엠바나 그 종름레 시샤바면 아니와테 응올라 종데다 당포테 질레 종고요레스 제상 아니와테 응올라 데시자바인스.
And again, don't worry too much about the details. For system 2, we get the reaction center, we get the process, we make ATP in photosystem 2. And then all those electrons are going to activate photosystem 1, where we get NADPH. So again, just remember, photosystem 2 makes ATP, photosystem 1 makes NADPH. Right?
That's
very important.
That under dinner Mambuchi or Yestang, you are the Karigi system, Okamala, Nipandiganalaya, Kuge. Kasa Jinjin Duagi, Tiwatis, Helonchi, or Latin data, Tamatilang Asukaritingores, and ATP Tingores, that Dikapsuku, the Latin data, Lord the Mampuchi Loco, Yopati Latin data, and Karchikoresena, Okumala Tampu Tignane, Natsulaya, and NADPHT Zugiores.
And why do we need water? Because in photosystem 2, ATP is made by this enzyme driven by the split of water. So we need water for photosystem 2.
Tadangatu, Okamala, Nipag Nalaya, Chuguya, Junsenka races, Tambalaya, de Capsungatsu, Nuba Zubi Capsus, Ra, Chuti Katur de Tanchene, Chugananayopi, Digarsa, Yamon the Pechitangores, the Cheza, Chutiguores.
And the moment water is split, what do we have here?
Tangatsula, Chuti Katuatang, Atsula Karagores.
Oxygen. What is a waste product of photosynthesis? Oxygen. That is what is released as the waste product.
Natsuge Dekasurvata, Ojurgi, Zinjurtila Tembe Chonvig, Niru Karesena, Niro, the Solon de Chagores.
Are we good?
This,
excellent, excellent. And here's just everything put together. Photosystem 2 happens before photosystem 1. We make ATP, sends it to photosystem 1. We make NADPH. Now the question that you have to ask is that these two are light dependent. Why do we have ATP and why do we have NADPH?
That under the Nyamta Derba in Bana, Nyamta Jerba in Bana, Ugamala Tampo, Nalayanga Suge. ATP Zuagi Nitanti Goroa, and it takes Jelaya, Mala, Uchmala Tampu Nalaya, and NADPH Yungoroa, that then Nichag Mala Tampotan Panichan by Nangas oil Tembigi Zinjung, which have your race. That theoretical race is Tambalaya, Urgimala Tam Nipaganania, ATP Zuguyopata, Urgimala Tampu Nalaya, NADPH Zugunu Jinsenka race.
And the question is, well, why? ATP and NADPH, what are they used for? That's the question that we have to answer.
That Trodaka system balaya ATP and NADPH said the Karista, Chili Karista, Kukarilla Pechuris, that Trotella Lenjaguris.
So we switch from a light dependent reaction for system 2 and for system 1 to a light independent reaction.
Ugamala Tampotan Nishan by Naro and Yota Tampon Nishan by no Ula Tembigi co Zijurchi Chimbarwa. Tangaso Karchiguresano, Ula Tembigi Zijurtino, Ola Matembigi Zijurching Wola Dugures.
In the light independent reaction is also called the Calvin cycle.
aha tanda ta ola matembe ge we jijurtila ya having ge junkhor segres.
Now, the Calvin cycle, it gives everybody nightmares. It's very complicated. Even I get confused by it, so we're going to really, really simplify it.
aha ta having ge junkhor sa te go nyopo shu chigres mi man shu go na chigres san sam ngalang go nagdus ben tanda ngaso tab kan de ngune desi jagins.
The Calvin cycle has 3 steps: fixation, reduction, and regeneration.
aha ta kola ya having ge junkhor tila rambasmi yores tampote jurkores nyati chasires sambati churches aitires.
And as you could see, in the fixation, we have this enzyme, which I haven't really talked about yet, but this is called rubisco. It's a very important enzyme in photosynthesis. Rubisco.
aha ta tanda de na ne ro tanda having ge jungkho na ne ya te kasa enzyme system bala ga suk de ro menzi ro menzi ke chembu chi go res ta rubisco se tanda ge tambu chi to te kola dese jayo mare sta ti ge chili la tane de chungo res.
Okay? And the other 2 parts, what do we see? ATP and ADPH. We got those from the light-dependent reactions, right?
aha ta pe ta nyati ba na rumba nyati la chasi ge rumba te la ya ne nga sula ya kare chungo res na de na la ya ne ATP ta NADPH te yungu do ko ji jo na la ro ATP ta NADPH te ko ne ra res na nga su ola tembi ge ji jo te na sa chong ro.
So now you see the link between the light-dependent and light-independent. In the light-independent, we use ATP, NADPH, and this enzyme, rubisco.
aha ta tanda de chi chu ko chi ka do tu so as ro nga su ola tembi ge ji jo na chong bi ge ta trimde te ta tanda ola ma tembi de na pe tang do as ta tanda de ge na la ola ma tembi ji jo de na la ya kasa ATP ta NADPH ta shenda ge tanda menji shenda de pe tang go menji shenda de pe tang go res.
So let's do our best to make sense of this cycle. It's a very difficult cycle, so let's make sense of this.
aha ta tanda de na ne kanda do chi me ro tanda ge khorjun de na la ya junkhor de na la kare chi yo me te nga su ge chi do diu ga ne ko lan te chi gos.
We get rubisco, that enzyme. We get the CO2 from the environment, right? And we're going to fixate this enzyme.
aha ta tanda de je kar chi go res na ro ani tampo te la nga su
So CO2 fixes rubisco, yeah.
aha ta fixes system ba juko chi yo res tanda ge ko ge menji chi go ro te juko chi go te karle te ni chung go res system bala ya tanda de na chung go res.
So at the end of fixation, we have this molecule that has 1, 2, 3 carbons, and there are 6 of them.
aha ta tanda te ge ko fixation juko te che ba imba na te ge jela nga su kar chung go res na ani de la ya ani carbon sum tam dem be ge didu chi cha go res te na do tu yo res.
So there are 1, 2, 3 carbons times 6, we have 18 carbons.
aha ta ko tena do 2 years tambala sum che 2 years tambala ya carbon ge duthen ka chore la na choje yo res.
So we fix rubisco, we reduce this molecule into G3P. So now, instead of having 6, we have 6, 1, 2, 3, 18 again.
aha ta tanda te ge jela ya ane reduction sa de kap se kar chi go res na chasi ta te ge number te chung go res ta te ka sim ba na G3P ku mano shag do ga de ka sim ba na carbon ge te ka su do carbon ge duthen ka su do dom be na choje ta ta de do.
So we reduce PGA to G3P. We have 6 of them. We lose 1. 1 is lost. It goes somewhere else.
aha ta da de kap se chasi chi vi de ka sim ba na de karsa PGA se de tanda de karsa G3P se de ngola jir go res ta de na ne G3P se de kan chi la go res te jenda ngola jir go res.
If we lose 1, we have 5 left. 5 times 3 is 15. So now we go to 15 carbons.
aha da ko tanda de na ne ko ge didu chi la ba im ba na ane karsa carbon ge duthen sum la ge ro sun la bal ne nga su la kha te ka su la go res na carbon duthen nga de la ge res.
And now, in order to regenerate rubisco, we need ATP from our first photosystem 2.
aha tako cherche chiagi chetu swa cherche ta laju te yang cherche chiagi chetu yang chi go rwa yang cherche chiagi chetu ngasu tampo ti karsa ola tembi gi mala nana chombi gi ani ATP te peche tango yores.
So by using ATP, we go back from 5 to this molecule Rubisco. There are 3 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 carbons.
Ta tanda tila tene dete rwa ko cherche chi wala tene dete ATP peche tanda te cherche chi wala tene dete yang chenga sula ya carbon chunga raga yores.
And now we are ready to restart the cycle again by refixing it with new CO2.
Ta yang che ta dila tene dete nga suge yang chenga suge ta diga khorjin chi to ga te yang chen gu zga la ya ta tampo kro carbon chunga ng gu zga do rwa oten gu zga yang che chi gores.
So you may recall, as we go through our wheel, we lose one of these molecules, going from 18 to 15. Where does this molecule go? And that is a question that we need to answer.
Ta da de jungkhon dina drustam balaya o telaya ngasuge G3P se ti de gin de chi la ru do ga rwa ta de ti la ba de call and do se ti ngasuge lanja go yores.
What is the main product of photosynthesis? The large molecule of what?
Ta ngasuge orjo chi ba in ba na orjo chi wala tene de ko gi dribe chi kare ngores.
Glucose, yes, excellent. So the moment that we lose one of these 6 G3Ps, it goes to make glucose.
Ta da G3P se te ko de chi la go do ga la ba te ko la ba je la ya ko ka do gores na ko chin chi de te tan da gulu ngar ji zu la ya chi gores.
But to make it more fun, we require 2 turns of the cycle because glucose requires not 1 G3P but 2 G3Ps.
Ta dene ta do ngaso glucose la gulu ngar ji zu la ya G3P se te consequent ko yo mare sa ni gu yo res ta tin stam la ya glucose de chi zu la ya jungkon de thama nyen ru gu yo res.
So we need 2 of these, so we have the whole cycle running twice.
Chezang azula ya G3P se de ni gu ya la ya ani ta de ge jungkon de thama nyen ru gu yo res.
And like I asked my students after going through this and getting headaches, does this make sense?
Ta namjen zinda pugiza trigi yo sta mambu system bala ya chingu na ge yo res ta tanda du sepa na de ge kuan ro chi trigi to es.
Yes. Don't worry if you don't. This is super heavy. I know. My students also, they have nightmares over this. But just think about how the carbons are changing, how we lose 1 molecule for glucose, and we need 2 of them, so we need 2 turns of the cycle to make 1 full glucose molecule. That's it.
Tade dilaya mambo yo pa dilaya nyokpo ke samlu matans ro ta de tab de ko ne samlu tang pa ba na nga su de carbon chunga ne ngo chi de carbon choje la cha ti na ne yang se carbon sum che chu du sla de ta ne ko de gulung energy te jogo yo ro gulung energy la ya zwe la ya ta da ge G3P se te ni gu yo ro ni gu yo sang so jing ko de thang ma ni lan ru be kap se glucose ge de chi zu ate ngo ro ta ti kha se cha so es ta.
Are there any questions?
Try yes sir.
The Kevin cycle chik doya la tunyo kaso go onas.
How long it takes to go through this Kevin cycle?
That is a good question. I don't know. I have to search it. I suspect that it does depend on the type of species, on the type of plant, but that is a question I don't know. I have to search it.
That all take lenti tata hakuma son singi jela dus tatone chagos ta dusim bana ko ya niru manda la yang ko ge tege ko tso katso go bate manda yogi res jela chechilen chagos.
There is nothing better than being asked a question that I don't know because it makes me learn something new. So thank you.
Ta ni ham ko ya ge tra chi tra tele ya ga chim dus karchila bana tele tene tangi jenda chi janga ngala ko ka rak dos tra tra tu chis
ni ito di tanda dila piji do di gar phosphorus re piji do
wala pi a pi ai la
dia dila piji ingu do pi kongi di tanda carbon yo
dia
di mai kongi tanda di pi shoni la pi ni do ingu do odi di
So what does this P represent?
phosphorus रे
Phosphorus.
Okay.
It's a phosphorus element.
Phosphorus race.
Rubisco, my friend, Rubisco is a very important enzyme for plants, for photosynthesis. It's the most common enzyme in all plants, period.
That day, Rubisco say the message to us. They by now young coach the Shangan Manchishla Yoris that she should tamale Yobagi message Goris that day young Mizite Tandage Matsu Ojula Hatchinkin Chebuin Bigi and the message Yoris.
So it is made up of 5 carbons and 2 phosphorus from one end and the other end. Very good point.
Tanda Trade Abudus, Taco Tandage Rubisco Sate Roa Ketchembuchi Chagor could Taptontic and the Chagoresena, Kolaya. Carbon the Trangache, and the Kugatanya phosphorus, which Mamma Segado, take it to Teneriores.
Tanda di to chiton shojira. Tanda dilasa ulla matimbi tanda dilasa ulla matimbi yuda. Ulla matimbi ujur sa yungudo. Di imbaina tanda ngazu shamudu sula tanda ujur yoma lagdo. Shamudu dan kusundo jonga mejidu sula ujur miadi dilan jiwa gariors tanda dila. Kusula shamudu sula ujur yori yoma minna ni tanda di ulla matimbi ujur labiyo kusur yung chokudayo.
So my question is, I've heard that there's no photosynthesis happening in mushrooms.
Mushrooms are not plants, they're fungi, they do not photosynthesize.
So this kind of like light independent cycle.
It does not happen in fungi.
Okay. My tanda shamu imba fungi what the fungi segdo hampugurlaya digmares.
Fungi are kind of weird. They depend, so they are decayers of organic material, and among other things, they are decayers of wood. So when a tree falls, right, you tend to see a lot of fungi. They are decaying, recycling the organic material found in plants, but they do not photosynthesize.
Tanda hampuguri imba fungi ratio or tanda hampuguri imba tanda. That's the Shantan driving on the Jungo Mare. Simana Kusuka Sena, Tandanga Suga, Chidengi, Nubu Rata, the Shintan, Shindonta, get the Shindon Lopa and Bana take on a humble Mamboshidua, Shamu the last Pachidua. But the tin on your piggy, Jingu did the Chura, Chidengi did the Zuku, that's Jet the Pechitongo, but in a rich race. You want to pay Uncle Nala or Jola Sopandugo Maris?
Question?
And a new draw in the carbon cycle set, Jinkur Niji, and glucose at Zogoyara. There's the Sarti Tambala, Jinkur, the Nis on the Zambala, the carbon, the Nijani Chanograva. Tijila Yanchirko, and Nita cycle and Kurgograve, Tijila Karichungres.
Sagamaroya, Chinikanda Sagaya.
Chanin Dijila, Neta G3P set, teaching and a carbon, the Sumlograva. Tanako Jonga Chadora, Jinkur Tompicus. And the Jinkur Nipa is on the Yanchir G3P set, teaching Mando, the Zambala carbon, the Chini Chakamare.
Kurachijana Chungara, Yansi Kurachijana Chunga Chagraka.
What is he asking?
He is asking like for the second, for the one go for the second cycle. So we will have 12.
No, it would restart. We essentially go to the end of the regeneration and we start from the beginning, but we just do it twice. It's the same process happening twice. We do not add the carbons from the first one. We restart the cycle.
Ngasu tangputin carbon kanon chetina yo maris. Ngasu kurumde yangche chikpachikchang gure tangyores. Yongya dedo adi, dani ko kanon jagdo adi.
And for the second cycle,
carbon chobjis itelando tambo.
Dela chunga doa. Chunga ka samdana chojeroa. Dela chojeroa. Tenuma sama lagarwa chunga roa. Chunga nang guzukura yangche samdangro chojeroa. Yangche dukwe kuranga tuchi jaga.
To restart the cycle, we have to refix Rubisco and we need another set of carbon dioxide.
De yongo doa ko samse yongo roa.
So photosynthesis could not happen, or the carbon cycle could not happen with the absence of carbon dioxide. We need carbon dioxide.
Tata jende chi shepa imbana roa tanda carbon ki jungkosh toka. Din joya laya carbon solo nidente gugo yores, carbon dioxide te gugo yores. Kedi carbon solo nidente mepa imbana? Any carbon cycle te jont kumares, carbon ki jungko te jungko mares.
And that brings me to the point of the circle of life. where we have photosynthesis, we have the process of photosynthesis, we have the emergence of glucose, the product of photosynthesis, and who uses photosynthesis, or the product of photosynthesis? We do. Organisms that are unable to photosynthesize, we use respiration, we break down glucose, right? And we release carbon dioxide, which is what our waste as respirators are. We release carbon dioxide for the plants, for them to photosynthesize, creating this cycle of photosynthesis, respiration, photosynthesis.
Ta danda de bana ro ta de nga chu chero ko khorjin da ure sero khorjin ba bana nga chu ta ojo chit khini ga chang te la tande de ta nga chu la ya ta cholong ta ta glungar ji gi ni bala su pate ga ro te nga chu mi gi pecho ta da ko jishala su par chi de ta ko pecho ta de te pecho ta la tande de te ta nga chu ge ya yang che nga chu ge ken chi bala te nga chu pha tang go ba de ka ba da wa sa la go ro carbon cholong ni don te lo go ro carbon cholong ni den te yang che yang sa sang pecho ta de ta ya ni ba ta yang nga chu go ya ge cholong te tung yo res tin sta bala de ge ni khorjin te dus du yo res
We good?
this
Tough material, very complicated, but I think you all did very, very well. I commend you all. This is not easy. It's not easy to teach it. A lot of moving parts, a lot of moving elements. But if we understand the fundamentals, we can make sense of it.
aha ta chegin banang go nyok po yo res sim bana che chu tan da de ya pa na song sto ta de na ne ko go nyok po yo re ko la ya chi cha shi mang po shu chi yo res im bai na ya chi tab du ga ne ta ko ge trip cha ke chi shu la nga su du ste de chi ko ga ne ko len ta pa chong song
Perfect time to go get some sugar.
ta gulung ji khashi chi se gora gulung ji
So before we go, two things. Do not forget to collect your leaves. Get as many as you can. At the very least, each of you get 20 leaves from different trees, different species. Write down if you know the species to have accuracy in your experiment.
aha ta temba se chi kare se stambala ya chi su mayo ngala ya ane te chi gores luma che go yores luma nyong thala nyu sanga chi sero chis manda ko ne chi ro chis ke ti lensa ge session ge rigti singyo pa bande ti matro chis
And number two, as you collect those leaves, be thankful to the plants. We would not be here without them.
aha ane luma te dibe kaps ane session tu la ya ane kar su gre tanga su ge ta thiji katin tu samro chis session te me pa bana nga su de la chut kumares
So hug the tree as you're taking the leaves from it. Okay? Thank you, my friends. And for break, let's go eat. We'll come back at 3:30. Don't forget your leaves.
aha sum to chekala jayons ane luma
you.
majero chis